All right, it's about that time. I've got 8:01 on the clock, so I will call this meeting of the Water Commission to order for Thursday, September 15th. We will start with the roll call. Appears everybody is here today, so all present. All right, item number 3, changes to the agenda.
Chair Kilborn, we'd like to remove item 5B. It's just not ready for conversation today.
Okay, noted. We will remove 5B. Okay, public comment. Anybody who would like to address the commission this morning? Nope, no takers today. Okay. All right, we will move on to the consent items. We have items A, C, and D now. We have the meeting minutes, the El Estero Treatment Improvement Project, and capital planning software. Does anybody have any questions or comments on any of these items before we...
Move to approve.
Okay, I've got a motion. I got a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, moves unanimously. Okay, item number 6, administrative items. We will start with Ms. Arroyo. She'll discuss professional services agreement for the El Estero wastewater treatment plant facility plan. Ms. Arroyo.
Good morning, members of the Commission. My name is Lisa Arroyo. I'm the Wastewater System Manager, and I'm pleased to be reporting on the El Estero Wastewater Treatment Plant Facility Plan. We are scheduled to go to Council on the 27th of September for award of contract to Brown and Caldwell for this work. The base contract amount is $354,299 with extra services in the amount of $35,429. Brown and Caldwell was selected via a request for proposal process, and we'll be looking from you today to give a recommendation for Council to approve the work and the contract. In today's presentation, I'll be walking through some of the recently completed work we've done, work that's on the horizon that's planned, and then future capital work that we anticipate will come as a result of this facility plan. Starting with some recent capital work, we started at the Headworks facility, and that's that blue square up on your screen. We did both the Headworks and the influent pumps projects. The Headworks was a $6 million state revolving fund loan project, which was completed in 2013. We basically overhauled the Headworks with replacing the auger system, installing bar screens, installing a washer compactor and conveyance system. And then we moved over to the influent pumps project, which was almost a $4 million project. It was funded largely by our 2004 bond funds, where we replaced our 4 influent pumps, all of the motors, drives, installed jib cranes, and currently we've got ongoing in the influent pumps a construction project to replace 2 of the variable frequency drives and the programmable logic controller system in there, and that should really complete that portion of primary treatment for the foreseeable future. Next, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the blue box, and that is our fog receiving station. We installed that and completed construction in 2014. This was another SRF-funded project, about $630,000 total project cost. And as part of that same SRF loan, we were able to clean our digesters, inspect them. We did some lining work, and the total SRF loan was about $1.4 million. We're still working on finalizing those costs. Jumping over to the tertiary plant, this was recently constructed, and the work that was done there, the middle 2 boxes, one is replacing the whole system. We replaced it with a MF system. The middle to lower box is going to be all of our chemical pumps for our sodium hypochlorite facility. And then we have on the other side of the right side is our reclaimed water reservoir, which was rehabilitated as part of that project. And finally, in construction now, at the top, is our secondary process improvements project. And that's a $32 million project where we'll be upgrading our secondary process. So planned work on the consent item was our fiscal year 17 project. That'll be replacing some of our primary sludge pumps, looking at the line going from the sludge pumps to our gravity thickener, making sure it's in suitable condition, installing a Vactor dump station, and just some of the, what we call the low-hanging fruit from our biosolids study that we did. We recently completed a biosolids study where we'll be doing some significant changes to the plant. Highlighted in green are all the areas we're going to be touching, and I'll just talk about it briefly so you can get an idea of the context of this project. It's going to be a $30 million process improvement project where we'll be doing some upgrades to our digesters. The big green box on the right-hand side, that's where we have our maintenance facility, our gravity thickener, and our DAFT. Those are all used to thicken the sludge before it's pumped to the digesters. We'll be basically tearing all of that out, going to centrifuges to thicken, which is going to be a much smaller footprint, and then installing a sludge haul-out facility. So our sludge building, our solids building, is on the actual left side. That'll be transformed into a maintenance building. It's got some seismic issues, so we'll be going through making those upgrades. And in addition, we'll be removing our sludge holding tank and all of, I'm not sure when the last time you've been down to the plant, but that area where we place all of our solids out to dry before we haul off, that whole mess, it'll be all cleaned up because we'll have a new state-of-the-art haul-out facility. So what's left? There's a lot left to look at. We've taken care of all of our major process areas. Now we're going to be looking at replacing equipment. One of the big items that we'll be looking at is our electrical distribution system. 4 of the 5 electrical distribution system substations are shown on there. Those need some work. Those are very critical to keeping the plant running, and we'll be looking at that in combination with our 2 generators to make sure that we are rehabilitate it and we are well equipped for power losses. We have a 2 megawatt generator and a 900 kilowatt, but the 900 kilowatt definitely needs to be replaced. And we need to work through some process on how to best equip us for failures, especially if the 2 megawatt were to go down. That's the one we rely on when we have a full power outage and it runs the plant. We'll be looking at odor control systems. We've gotten some of them we'll be taken care of with the biosolids project. We do have at least one that will need rehabilitation. We'll be taking a look up there at the primary and preliminary treatment areas. Our grit chamber is a single point of failure. We can't take it out of service right now to repair, rehabilitate it. We'll be looking for solutions to be able to do that in the future, give us more operational flexibility. We'll be doing some replacement of equipment at the primaries. Disinfection, which is down at the bottom, we'll be looking to do some work on our chlorine contact chamber. It's in need of significant repairs. Operationally, it's very challenging for us to go in and clean it because you can't take that process out of service, and we don't really have any way of bifurcating it right now to do cleaning. It was a challenge last time we cleaned it. We need to clean it fairly soon, and we'll be looking for some good, sensible solutions to fix that area. We'll also be looking at our SCADA system, upgrading our SCADA master plan, coming up with a plan on how to phase out our old software equipment and bring in new. Underground infrastructure, most of it is in pretty good shape, we think, but what we want to do is look at when should we start looking at replacing them. We have been doing manholes. We have more manholes to do and getting them on a cycle. We'll be taking a quick look at the recycled water distribution pump station. Whether or not we do any work in there will be something to look at and discuss in the future. And plant security. Not only our camera system needs to be updated, but also, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but we have an open gate Monday through Friday at the front of the plant. And we want to look at ways to close that entrance off, so you have to be let in and come in and check in versus anyone can walk through that front gate. I think we're vulnerable there. So that's some of the work we see coming on the horizon. The approach we'll be taking is developing a roadmap. This will be a more detailed 10-year plan where we'll be developing packages of projects based on criticality and funding over the next 10 years. We'll have schedule dialed in, we'll understand the cost estimates, but we'll also be looking at the 25-year plan. What else do we need to be thinking of between the 10 and 25-year time frame, but not quite as detailed look. Brown & Caldwell is going to go through, they're going to take a look at all of our equipment, they're going to be looking at our maintenance records, our record drawings, some of the studies that we've done recently. We've done a concrete assessment study, we've done an electrical study, putting that all together and ranking everything on a criticality. The map you see in front of us, or the grid, is on the vertical axis is the likelihood of failure. Where do we put that based on 1 to 5 as how likely is it to fail based on previous maintenance records, lifetime expectancy, and things like that. On the horizontal scale, you see the criticality of failure. How critical is that piece of equipment in our process, 1 to 5? At the end of the day, the product of those two numbers is going to give us a criticality rating. Everything in the red, that stuff we're going to address first because it's the most critical, because it's more likely to fail and it's got a higher criticality rate. The green will be something that'll be, pushed out probably into the 10 to 25 year time frame. While they're doing this, we're going to be looking at sustainable elements. Probably one that comes to mind is reuse. As we're going through trying to put packages of projects together, take a look at where our long-term goals are, our long-term plans, and make sure that we're not putting something in today that we'll be ripping out tomorrow. And the final thing they'll be doing is a peer review of our biosolids project. As you saw from the green squares, there's a lot of moving parts in there. We'll be demolishing whole buildings, and we want a peer review before we really commit to that plan. One thing I showed you at budget season was this slide. It's our capital funding. We have the blue on the top. That's our SRF funded projects. We'll be spending about $95 million over the next 10 years. A lot of it will be SRF funded because it's the secondary process improvement projects and the upcoming biosolids, which is about $63 million, and that's the blue you see. The green on the bottom, that's our pay-as-you-go capital that we get from our rates. We usually get somewhere between $4.2 and $4.6 million every year that goes to capital projects. It funds our collection system, lift station, and El Estero projects. When you take out the roughly $2.1 million that we spend on collection system, the roughly $400,000 on lift station, that leaves about $1.7 to $2.0 million for capital work, pay as you go for El Estero. One thing this facility plan is intended to do is to help match funding, pay as you go funding, with the projects and confirm that our 10-year financial plan is on the mark for rate increases and that we don't have any big surprises coming down the road with funding. Kind of ties in with the schedule. We'll be looking for Brown & Caldwell to start in October. They'll be gathering data, looking at reports, in phases A and B. Phase C, they'll be evaluating all the equipment and coming up with the ranking of all the equipment. Phase D, we're hoping to have by about February 26, 2017. That's going to be the detailed projects, and that'll be our first look at whether or not funding is sufficient for our 10-year capital program. Which ties in nicely to rate increases. And although I don't expect anything major this next year, it'll give us our first indication if we're not on track with our funding. They'll be finishing up the facility master plan in May of 2017, so at that point we should have it well dialed in and fully understand how it could impact rates. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks. I have two fairly simple questions. When you discussed the sludge thickener area, you said some of the installations there right now have seismic safety problems. As we know, this place is sort of a seismic time bomb. With everything that happens, is there a way that seismic strengthening is specifically incorporated into the designing?
Yes, we will be looking at seismic, just like we have with the other major projects, and upgrading them to code as we do these major changes. The biosolids, the solids handling building definitely has some seismic issues, and we will be looking to make retrofits so that it is up to code when we do this work.
You think code is good enough for our particular situation?
Yes, it's going to be turned into a maintenance building, so we'll bring it up to code, and it should be sufficient. We won't be having the way the plan is written now. We won't have any process in that building.
Okay, my other question is kind of simple regards the state revolving fund loans. When the slide with those is paying back the loans part of the ongoing pay-as-you-go green bars down at the bottom?
No, it would be under a different slide that I showed you in the rates. That's part of our overall budget is our debt fund where we pay back our SRF loans, our bond funds. We have a debt line in our operating fund. So this is just purely capital funding that you see on this particular slide.
Thanks.
Any other questions? No. Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you teased me in the last paragraph with a lot of things that resonate with me, and that's the sustainable part. But then part of your presentation talks about making sure you don't put any equipment that you're going to take out rather than what I think is sustainable. And you talk about reuse and the fact that it's going to be a 25-year study, but you're going to really concentrate on the 10 years. So my question is really, when does this process or another process really start to look at both your on-the-ground needs or the policy directive on utilizing more recycling, getting to potable resource, and looking for a goal of actual no discharge into the ocean? Is that part of this process? When and how do we push that to get a policy directive on that? But where does that take place?
So to answer your question, we're always going to need the chlorine contact chamber and the ability to discharge to the ocean, because as we get wet weather, we can't push that over to any type of potable reuse.
So what would that go in a gallons per day? So maybe it's 6 million now. What would be the minimum you'd have to push out into the ocean and the maximum that you could recapture?
Our plant has
not on existing. I'm just saying from a
right.
If somebody just said, "Here, build what you want," what would happen in that 6 million of discharge today? What could we hope to recapture of that and get as close as possible to zero discharge?
So, Commissioner Jordan, that's exactly what we were hoping to answer in October when we come back with the feasibility study. We're specifically looking at potable reuse and how much of that water we'll be able to recapture. And so we will, unfortunately, there will always be a discharge even from the potable reuse facility, so there will always be a need. But appropriately sizing will be a part of that, and I think it's very timely that we'll have some of that information at the end of October.
But this part of this will be also?
We'll be feeding that information to this study, but the way we are approaching this is for potable reuse, we will need an initial site. We feel that El Estero is maxed out for its wastewater treatment needs, and obviously could use more space. And so when we're talking about potable reuse, and when we're bringing back this discussion in October, we will be talking about what additional space is needed for that. And so that'll be a more developed discussion in October with our public hearing.
So cool my jets, huh?
Great questions.
Because I'm always on the site issue too, on when do you start to address where you'd be in 25 years if you could do that, and do you have no space? Because my feeling is exactly what you say, is that you're out of space.
Yes.
And some tough questions are going to have to be asked. Okay. No. So this is really not the vehicle. That vehicle will start better in October.
They will feed into each other. We will be sharing. I mean, Lisa and her staff have been very involved in the potable reuse discussion, and it's working out nicely with this facility planning. We'll be able to share that information at the end of October and kind of collaborate. Here's what we're thinking. Here's the spaces we're needed. Here's what kind of discharge we're going to anticipating to come. But I still think you're going to have times when the facility goes down and the need to discharge 6 million, gallons a day again. And so how do we appropriately size the facility to handle those? I mean, even our flare that we have, that's a big ticket item for the city, is burning off methane. And, there's times when the cogen facility, it's not very frequent, but it goes down and we need to have the ability to discharge that gas safely.
The difference there is it would be a choice rather than a requirement at that time.
Right,
We'd
right,
have
exactly.
We want the choice.
It'd be an operational flexibility thing, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions, comments? No? I just I had one question about looking 10, 20, 25 years down the road. How comfortable do we feel, or do we have a good indication of what we might see as far as regulations go, as far as our discharge? Or, I mean, right now we're kind of, I don't know, it seems like it's ever evolving, ever changing. Do we have is it just a big unknown, or do you have a good sense of where we're going on that front?
I don't. I'm relying on Brown and Caldwell to help us with what they are hearing as far as regulations, and that's part of their task, is not only to make sure that we are good today, but we look into the future and make sure we're going to be good tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be good to take a look at the projects that they're proposing and just make sure that, all right, do we feel that this is a long-term project, or that we're just kind of pilfering money away that may not necessarily be useful in the future? But I like the direction that this is going, though. I think it's a good study to prepare and a good roadmap for us to have. So, all right, so you're looking for a recommendation to...
Mr. Chair, I'd move to support staff recommendation to City Council.
Okay. Second. All right, I got a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Okay.
Yes.
Michael, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Moves unanimously. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 6B. We'll have an update on the operational performance of the recycled water treatment facility. Ms. Araya, you're up again.
Good morning. Today's presentation will be an update to the Commission on our operational performance of our recycled water facility. Before we move into the actual operation of it, I just want to walk through a little bit of the background, just in case you haven't been involved with it or lost a little track of what's gone on. The facility itself was constructed back in 1989. This facility was one of the first in California to use recycled water. It was designed as a 4 million gallon per day facility. It was, there it is, it's pictured. And it was in operation for over 20 years. It needed replacement. We always kind of say rehabilitation, but it really was a need of replacement. Not only was it not operating so that we could have produce water that we could recycle without blending, but we also had a lot of corrosion, a lot of operational challenges. And so back in 2012, we made the decision to replace the facility in its entirety rather than rehabilitating it. And those are some of the pictures that you see right there of some of the corrosion that we had on the old facility. In 2012, we did an assessment and a preliminary design. In 2013, we did the final design, and in 2014, we started construction. Construction is now complete, and the scope of work included demolishing the existing facility, and there's kind of a fun picture of it partially demolished, constructing the new MFUF facility, putting in the new chemical systems, rehabilitating the recycled water storage facility, reconfiguring some of the piping, some stormwater drainage improvements, and that's the bulk of the improvements. Kind of a fun little slideshow here that's going to show you, you're going to get to watch it get constructed right now. We installed a time time-lapse camera, and these are just snapshots of it being demolished. Now you're going to start seeing the foundation being built. And so that's some of the concrete work that was done. Here, this is the foundation. You'll start seeing the 3 pads for our 3 UF trains. Right now on the left side, they were installing the trench for all of the utilities. Those are the skids right there. Unfortunately, they put the canopy up right now, so it's harder to see. But you'll start seeing some of our tanks. We had the chemical tanks that are being installed. You'll see a big black one right there. That's our filtrate tank. And there it is, complete. On October 30th, the regional board gave us permission to start distributing recycled water. We did that, and at that time, we were only able to reliably produce about 0.7 million gallons of water per day. Back in June of 2016, we contracted with Trussell Technologies. They were helping us to optimize our recycled water production. The goal was an 8-week contract so that we can increase production and meet summer demands without having to augment with potable water. In addition, they were to evaluate the membrane system capacity. And right there you see some of our membrane modules, and you'll see the configuration. They are installed vertically. And this picture, it shows you just a typical membrane. On the inside, that's the module. Inside you'll see all of the straw-like membranes within the module. Some of the things that Trussell has worked with us that I'll go into greater detail is a lot of operational changes to our cleaning protocols, some programming changes, our backwashing. We installed a coagulant system, and also some process changes at El Estero. All of this to get us up to about 1.5 million gallons per day of water to meet the summer demands. So as I talk about changing in cleaning protocols, we have a couple of different chemical cleans that we perform. We perform mini cleans, which are using an acid and an alkaline clean. Those are helping us with the scaling and the metals, and then also with the fouling from organics. And then we also have the full cleans. Those are not as frequent. They are more intense to help restore the overall permeability. When we first started with Trussell, we were doing mini cleans on a time run basis. So every time we had 48 hours of run time on a skid, we would do an alkaline clean. The alkaline clean is for the organic fouling. And then every 96 hours of run time, we would do the acid clean for the scaling and the metals. We were seeing a lot of fouling with that cleaning regime. In addition, with our full cleans, we were doing them on a monthly basis. And we had no real flexibility. So we came in, did a lot of programming, some trial and error, and we've gotten down to the point where we are doing the mini alkaline cleans on a daily basis. So before, it could have been anywhere between 3 and 5 days, dependent on runtime. We do them now every single day. We do them at night when we have the least amount of flow coming into the plant so that we can get the highest amount of production during the day when we have the largest amount of feed water. We do our acid cleans every 3 nights. So all in all, we're now doing 4 cleans per night. We're cleaning all 3 of our skids for organics, and we rotate through the 3 skids for the inorganics. We also do a full clean once every 3 weeks, and we rotate through the skids. This has really helped reduce our fouling, and it's given us a really good increase in production. What it is doing, though, is we're about a 4 to 6 fold increase in cleaning And so there's a lot more chemical cleaning going on than what was originally anticipated. We also went through and did a lot of changes to our backwash system. The backwash system is really intended to dislodge the solids and flush them out. Initially, protocols were mostly air, and then the water, as it would flush it out, and they'd consolidate at the bottom of the membranes. There you see the skid. You've got the feed water is that big, large pipe on the bottom. It's hard to see. Here's an air pipe, and then you've got your backwash water and your filtrate on the top. So when we're doing our backwashing, the way we were doing it before, it was all of the solids were settling at the bottom of the membranes and fouling. We're now using a different combination of cleaning where we're using water and air in a manner that it's agitating it more and flushing it, so we're not seeing that settling at the bottom. We've been able to go from once every 8,500 gallons of backwashing and extending it out to about 11,000 gallons. So we're doing fewer backwashes, we're getting better results, and we're increasing our recovery rate. When we first started, our recovery rate was about 60%. So if you have 100 gallons of water that we produce, 60 gallons would be going out to the system, 40 would be used for cleaning processes and flushed down the drain and circled back to the front of the plant. We're currently at about an 83% recovery rate, so that's much higher. We're seeing that in our production numbers. And so did a lot of trial and error working with Trussell to get us to this point.
Well, this may be a silly question, but why can't we flip the filters over? If we're getting settling at the bottom, can't we just put the discharge on the bottom?
Well, it's gravity that's settling them down, and so we just changed up the regime and worked with it so that we've got a more effective use of water and air to keep it agitated, suspended, and flushing it out. And so it's been working really effectively to do that. I don't know that flipping it upside down would necessarily do much, because you're still going to have, if you don't have the right combination of cleaning, because you're still going to have it settling.
Flushing, if it's settling to the bottom, it'd be easier to flush out the filters if the.
Well, let me flip back to this line. So you also have
nitty-gritty. I was just asking.
Yeah, you do have your sewer drain line, and I think you can see it on this one. The white pipe coming out on this side is your drain back to sewer. So it will drain. The water from here, I may have mischaracterized it. Your backwash water comes in on the top, and then it'll drain out of the bottom, but you're still getting it collecting. Your feed water comes in on the bottom. So the next thing we did is we installed a coagulant system. The coagulant system is going to help with that colloidal fouling. That's those really small particulate solids that are going to get into the membranes, pass through, get clogged up, and experience fouling. So the coagulant will help the particles basically cling together and not be able to pass and become larger, and not be able to pass through the membranes to begin with. It was recently installed. When we put the skids to work really hard, if we have to produce a lot during the day, we'll put the coagulant system on. We haven't seen great results yet, but we're still working to dial it in, and we'll be working closely with Trussell to diagnose, are we maybe needing to apply it upstream a little bit more of the process to give it more time to get those particles clumping together. It's still a work in progress, but we feel that it will be effective in helping with overall production. We've also done some changes with our secondary process. There's not much we can do because of the state that the plant is in. We're doing that $32 million project that will help us tremendously with water quality in the future. What Trussell is helping us do is operate much more aggressively than we ever have in the past. We're increasing our SRT, that's our solids retention time. It's how long a solid will stay in the system before it's wasted on average. And when you increase that SRT, you're going to get better water quality. You're going to get lower turbidity, lower total suspended solids, which is all better for filtering. However, as you start to increase your SRT, there becomes a point where it becomes challenging to manage operationally because you start floating in and out of nitrification, which can be problematic because if you start doing that and you might, and we've seen this in the past where we denitrify in the secondary clarifiers, and there's a picture of a secondary clarifier, and you'll end up floating sludge over the weir and violating your permit. So you have to be very, very careful. It's a very thin line between in and out of nitrification. So we've stretched it about as far as we can. Traditionally, at this time of the year, we do float in and out of nitrification. It's something that's very hard to control. We are currently doing that, and they're working with us to control that. We're challenged by our air, our blowers. We have too much from one of our blowers, not enough from another. We just don't have that range that we really need to be in to better control it. And there's some operational practices that they're working with us. In the past, when we start getting into the point where we're starting to nitrify, we'll dose with chlorine to help control it. They're allowing us to go a little bit further than we normally would before dosing with chlorine, just to kind of push that envelope. We're definitely seeing that that is helping with the recycled water at this point. So all of those things combined, all of those changes, we've gone from initially producing about 0.7 MGD to current production, which is reliably right now at about 1.5 MGD. We are meeting summer demands. We have not needed to augment with potable water. However, it comes with a price. We initially asked our recycled water users to cut back on their usage, which they have, which is helping us not exceed that 1.5. We are not connecting any new people to the system at this time. We've worked with Montecito Country Club in modifying some of their plans so that they didn't need to use as much recycled water. I mentioned before that we've got a lot more cleaning that we're doing. We're seeing increased costs in chemical. This plant, with everything we have going on, with the secondary process changes that we're, pushing the envelope there, working to get all this dialed in, has been very operationally intense. But we're managing at this point. And we're managing to not need to use potable water. We're going to continue working with Trussell, and the goal is to get production up to the 2.5 MGD.
We've also continued our negotiations with La Cumbre Country Club, who's very interested in connecting to our recycled water system. And unfortunately, until we, I think, can achieve that 2.5 MGD, we just really can't commit to selling them any recycled water at this time. But they are extremely anxious to get connected, particularly as this drought wears on. But they do see this as a viable future for them, and it's unfortunate that we haven't been able to get the facility up to that full capacity.
Yeah. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions on the operational performance.
So I've got a question on the size of this facility. So we started out with a 4 MGD and tore it down, and we built a 2 MGD plant. Was that was there a specific reason for that? Like, what's our master plan sized recycled facility?
So we went through that during the preliminary design phase of how much water do we anticipate needing, and I think we looked at the urban water plan and the city's water long-term
water supply plan.
Thank you. We looked through about 2030 and what would the needs be, and we sized it at 3 MGD. At the current state, we're looking to get 2.5 MGD out of the plant.
Were there any provisions made to expand this plant in the future, or was that we're just kind of looking in this window? All right, our water management plan says this is what we need in the future.
Right. Chair Kilborn, we did, the plan did look at long-term needs and where it could be used, because the challenge is the cost of building this infrastructure and installing it. And we felt for the foreseeable future that 3 MGD was going to be sufficient to meet our needs. The other challenge that we're struggling with is space to put this facility. And certainly we are optimistic that by the time this horizon finishes, we'll be into potable reuse, which is a much higher and better use of our wastewater than for landscaping. So we felt like this size facility was going to be sufficient for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going. That if we do get into the DPR, then is this facility size large enough, or are we going to have to look at expansion for that again in the future?
So the presentation and public hearing that we're going to have in October dives into that, which is the what we can get out of continuing to distribute recycled water, what potable reuse and indirect potable reuse gives the community. And so we'll be weighing all of those different factors, and we'll appreciate all of your input on that as we move forward.
Okay. Ms. Bernie?
Thank you, Ms. Arroyo. I know that you and your staff have been very creative and appreciate your work on this. So we originally designed a facility for 3 MGD. We started producing at 0.7. Now we're up to 1.5, which is a great improvement, but we're still extremely far from that 3. So we're not meeting the design specifications. Are there repercussions for the contractors that built the facility, specifically around all of these increased costs?
Sarah's going to answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner and Chair Barney. If I could just comment just a little bit on that. And the reason why we're only talking about the operational, what's on the agenda today is just a discussion on the operation and current maintenance and, the status of the recycled water facility, is because we're investigating the contractual issues around.
Introduce yourself real quick.
Excuse me.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sarah Connect, the Assistant City Attorneys. So currently we're investigating the contractual issues surrounding the rehabilitation, the reconstruction of the recycled water facility. So at this point, we haven't concluded those investigatory conversations with the contractor, the subcontractor. So we're really not at a point where we can elaborate on those discussions at this point. So Ms. Arroyo is only prepared to discuss the operations.
Yep. Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple questions, and Sarah, that's the number one question I get asked when this subject comes up also. So we lay out a really bad kind of number of timeline of what's taken place, but then the only answer is, well, we're investigating that. And at some point, it needs to be a better answer than that, because people don't really have a choice when they get taxed for the capital improvements, and then they don't feel really good about it at the end if there's not a really good, clear answer with that something was under-designed or poorly designed, and we did have ability to go back and make ourselves right. It's okay. That's just what I hear in the line at the supermarket every time. Ms. Arroyo, a specific question, though. The increased cleaning, and it doesn't sound pleasant, acids and stuff. And does that also have a cost in the long-term lifetime of either the filters or the equipment by increasing this cleaning and this purging and all that?
Yes, in addition to having the increased cleaning costs that we bear directly month to month, we would expect to see some decline in the filters and the membrane system.
And then all this, of course, then increases the price of the end product, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And then to follow on to what Ms. Connect had to say is we are pursuing, I think the public should know that we are pursuing making the city whole with the issues that we have faced with this facility. I think our primary focus, though, has been on getting this facility to meet our needs so that we don't have to use potable water. That's primary task number one. But in parallel, we are also making sure that the city and the ratepayers are made whole by the challenges that we've had in this design.
I like that answer better. Are there other examples other places where recycling water is working better? The system that's designed is producing water at the rate that was engineered, and it's doing it at a in today's world at a reasonable cost. Or is it just, or are we going to look back in 10 years from now when we go to fully potable? Is this just going to be a bad technology that never worked?
No, I mean, this is the way the industry is going. It's just very finicky, and getting the chemistry right is challenging, and that's what we're working on here. It isn't. I wouldn't say they've got all the bugs ironed out, and that's part of the challenge with this. Versus before we used like a media filter, it was kind of old school. Unfortunately, the results were more unpredictable. I mean, what I do have to say is the water quality that we're getting on here is excellent. It's very consistent. I think in general our users are going to be much happier with that water quality. It's just the challenge is managing the treatment process is a little more difficult. Before we were having we couldn't control really the water quality as much, and that's why we were having to blend it with potable water. I mean, this is the path of the future. This is going to be similar technology we're going to be using for pretreatment for potable reuse. So this is something that we need to embrace. This is the future.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Commissioner Jordan, I could just add, I didn't want to give the impression that we're not making progress. We have made a lot of progress in discussions with the contractors and the subcontractors, and we're just about at the point where we're ready to come back to the City Council and to you and to approve a plan forward with this. And so there will be progress in the very near future, but at this point, we're not quite there where we can say what that's going to be. But I do think that we will be back, and you will be pleased with what we will be presenting very soon. So,
thank you for that.
There is a plan, and we will be coming to a point where I think we will be getting this plant up to the original design capacity.
Okay, thank you so much.
I've got one last question. In regards to upgrades going on at the plant right now, is there a point at which the influent water to the recycled treatment plant is going to be good enough quality that we will just boost our production up to 2.5 MGD? I know you're making some tweaks in the plant right now to help that out, but do we have anything in the queue as far as plant or facility upgrades that might assist in that effort?
Well, the secondary process improvements project is going to take us into nitrification, and when you nitrify, you're going to be increasing or getting better water quality coming out of your second process. So that will help. It's about a year and a half off before we will actually have it constructed and start nitrifying, and I don't see that as the golden ticket for us going from 1.5 to 2.5. It will help, but it's not the be-all, end-all.
So it's all basically...
We're working with Trestle to get to the point where we can get to 2.5 and what it will take.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, comments? I appreciate the update and the report. Okay. We'll move on to item...
No
recommendation on that one. So we will move on to 6C, the water quality update. Ms. Taylor.
So, Mr. Chair, we're running like a few minutes behind, so we'll try and move this presentation along quickly so we can stay on schedule.
Good morning, Chair Kilborn and the Water Commission. I am Kathy Taylor. I'm the Water System Manager, and I'm here to provide you with an update on our water quality. I'll be providing you with information about the Gibraltar Reservoir water quality, our recent Ray Fire impacts to the watershed, Lake Cachuma water quality, Cater water treatment plant challenges, and we'll be discussing our Stage 2 disinfection byproduct rule, talk about our groundwater wells, and our distribution system projects for water quality. Gibraltar Reservoir water quality, right now it's currently about 8 feet deep, which has about 600 acre-feet of water in it. And it has high levels of total organic carbon, or TOC, at 17.4 milligrams per liter, which is 3 times more than Lake Cachuma. And I'll be talking about total organic carbons throughout my presentation here, so that's one term I would hope you can just key in on. We are planning on releasing the water in Gibraltar downstream at the end of September, and part of this is for compliance with the Jinchao release, and that's 616 acre-feet of water we're required to release downstream at the end of every summer, beginning of fall. And we'll also be releasing the rest of the water for water quality at Gibraltar. This should take about 30 days. And when I say for water quality, right now it's untreatable for drinking water. So we really need to purge what we have in there out of the reservoir before we can send it down through Mission Tunnel into Laurel Reservoir and on to treatment at the Cater Water Treatment Plant. The Ray Fire impacts, as you know, we recently had the Ray Fire. And I think it's almost 100% contained or complete. This fire, it's still burning. The Ray Fire burned hottest above Gibraltar. And the BEAR team, which is the Burned Area Emergency Response Team, it's part of the fire service, I think the Forest Service, they have come in and evaluated the area, and they anticipate that Gibraltar will see a 300 to 500 acre-feet of debris and sediment flow into Gibraltar this winter if we get significant rains. And the runoff should be 4 times the normal runoff into the reservoir. As a result, we anticipate we will have reduced storage capacity in Gibraltar and increased TOC, the total organic carbons, similar to what we saw in Zaka Fire. Zaka Fire, just post-Zaka Fire, the first flush, the TOC levels spiked over 20, and we couldn't take the water until it settled down a bit. So we're anticipating something similar with the Ray Fire.
So Gibraltar has, we just finished a bathymetric survey on the capacity of it, and it's 5,992 acre-feet of storage. And so we anticipate, I don't know if we'll get it all this year. It will depend on how quickly the rainfall comes in, but we do expect the reservoir capacity to diminish to somewhere around 5,500 or less. And so certainly not something we're looking forward and puts more pressure on the pass-through agreement, getting that in place, getting that working for us. But as Kathy mentioned, the water quality issues are the immediate concern that we're focused on.
Lake Cachuma water quality. The lake elevation is at 647.05 with approximately 14,462 acre-feet of water in it. It's about 7% of capacity. The TOC is at 4.5 to 5 and is increasing. We're seeing problems with geosmin, which is cause taste and odor problems. But Cater's ozone helps combat this. State water has higher bromide, which converts to bromate when it's treated with ozone. And drinking water has a bromate maximum contaminant level of 10 parts per billion, and currently we're at 6. Cater Water Treatment Plant challenges. To combat the high TOC at Cachuma, we're adding more chemicals to reduce the finished water TOC, again the total organic carbons, to 2.8 milligrams per liter for compliance with our DBP, or our disinfection byproduct regulations. The main chemical, which is powdered activated carbon, is expensive. It's over half of our monthly chemical budget at Cater. And managing the bromate levels is a challenge because it's a byproduct of the ozone process. The Stage 2 disinfection byproduct rule, these are our DBPs, were regulated to 80 parts per billion for trihalomethanes and 60 parts per billion for haliocetic acids. These DBPs increase with warmer temperatures that we're seeing because the lakes are lower, and higher TOC levels that come in contact with the chlorine in our drinking water, and also older water. So we're not seeing a lot of water turnover in our system, so the DBPs increase with that. And ozone we have an ozone plant up at the Cater Water Treatment Plant. This was a major capital project a few years ago to assist with the Stage 2 disinfection byproduct rule. Ozone, we use it as a pre-treatment. It's a superoxidant that reduces the DBP precursors in the water. So by reducing the precursors before you go into the treatment plant, the idea is that you will have fewer TOCs going out through the finished water. However, remember, as I said, bromate is the byproduct of ozone, and we are regulated for bromate levels with a maximum contaminant level of 10 parts per billion, and we're currently at 6. We have 8 disinfection byproduct sample stations throughout the distribution system that are sampled quarterly.
So we have basically a perfect storm brewing here in the sense that we have, with the reservoirs being so low, we have a more concentrated total carbon load in the reservoirs. The reservoirs are warmer than normal, which is challenging it. And then we have very low demand in the system. And in fact, it's very typical for us in the winter. We'll take reservoirs offline to increase turnover of water, basically the age of water in this treated water in the system. But in August, of all things, we took off one of our key reservoirs, which we only do in the winter. We took it offline to help boost demand in the system and keep the water turning over. Because what we are combating is that the longer this water with organics is out there and interacting with chlorine, the more you have this reaction occurring. And so it is a delicate balance that Kathy and her staff are working with.
Recently, this last third quarter, we had an operational evaluation level, or an OEL, exceedance for our third quarter. This is the first time we've ever had this. The OEL is kind of like a canary in the coal mine for our distribution system. This is saying you're having a problem with your TTHMs. What are you going to do about it? So this OEL exceedance must be reported in our annual consumer confidence report that we send out to our customers by early June. And we also, within 90 days, we have to provide the Department of Drinking Water with a plan for changes we're going to make to avoid having a locational running annual average, or an LRAA violation. And this is a big deal. It is a big deal.
If we violate on the LRAA, which our next testing will be in November?
On November 7th, 2016.
That will require us to be notifying the customers that are who are represented by that specific sampling station.
So our plan for reducing the TTHMs, or trihalomethanes, by this fourth quarter sampling date is we're planning on installing a mechanical mixing aeration system at McLaughlin Reservoir. Aeration in reservoirs has proven to be a very successful method for reducing trihalomethanes in the water. And we also plan to modify the operation of the distribution system to minimize water age. As Mr. Hagmark mentioned, we have one of our reservoirs offline currently, so that's less storage in the system, and so the water is turned over more frequently. We're lowering some of the levels in some of our other reservoirs. But it is a very tough balance because we, think of our reservoirs as storage for fire protection. So we're very mindful of that. So again, it's a very delicate balance. We are also trying to lower our TOCs, the levels of the TOCs leaving Cater to below the 2.8 milligrams per liter. This should help in the system as well. Our groundwater wells. I thought this was an interesting statistic right now. Overall, our average water demand throughout the system is just under 10 million gallons per day, and we're in September, so that's I don't think we've ever been this low. And our well production throughout the city is about 2.7 million gallons per day. As for water quality, the wells have iron and manganese, which cause color and taste issues, which we treat with chlorine and filtering. And at this point, with our Ortega groundwater treatment plant, it's essential for treating our water that we're getting from Veracruz High School, City Hall, and our corporation yard wells.
I think what's interesting to note in this fact, too, this is something that we've been struggling with internally, is Cater was designed to treat a lot of water. And its low threshold for continuous operation is about 6 MGD. And we are quickly approaching that. Keep in mind, we do treat water from Montecito and Carpinteria, but we anticipate with desal online this winter, there could be times when we need to actually shut down Cater for periods of time because we can't treat water at a lower volume. And so we are working internally to see what other options, and we have been communicating with Department of Drinking Water to basically see how that operation will work.
And as for distribution system projects, currently we have ValveTech. This company has a truck-mounted filter that enables us to have a zero discharge flushing operation. Flushing the distribution system is prior to the drought, we did this annually just for the health of the distribution system, and we had not done this because it takes a lot of water, and it's also a perception problem for us to be flushing water down the gutters, to our customers who are doing so great to going to such great efforts to conserve water. However, with the ValveTech project, they connect fire hydrant to fire hydrant, and then they flush the system at a scouring velocity to get any of the naturally occurring sediments that fall out lay on the pipes out of the system. And currently, they're working in the downtown area or the low zone. They're focusing on this area in anticipation of the startup of the desal plant. Because with the desal plant, we will be sending water the opposite direction through the pipes. So we imagine the last time the desal plant was started up, they did see a lot of kick up of the scaling and more particulates in the water because of that. So we're hoping to get ahead of this with the ValveTech flushing project. We are also planning on going to council probably before the next Water Commission meeting with a distribution system water quality assessment contract. And this is an evaluation of all of our different water sources for corrosivity, and it will create an action plan if needed. So we'll be looking at our groundwater wells and our surface water wells, and then once desal comes back online, it will be looking at desal water and how they all interact, and do we have any concerns about corrosivity within the system. And with that, I will take questions, and I'll leave you with this photo I received yesterday of courtesy of Bill Dooley. And I want you to point out in this lower left corner, right above Bill's name, this hole here. That's where the barge was, the emergency pumper at Kachuma was in early June. And so so quickly, it's kind of we would have been landlocked had we left it there. And this is the pipeline, how we're getting our water, and this is the new barge location here. So the water goes from that barge down off the left corner of this photo through the Tecolote Tunnel and onto the south coast. So with that, I will take any questions.
So I'm struck with how everything you try and do good also has a bad consequence. As long as if today stays the same, and Kachuma just becomes a conduit for water rather than a storage facility, are the problems you just went through and treating this, causing that, do those problems continue? Is that just inherent with the way it will be?
Yes, these problems will continue to plague us with low demands and low reservoir levels. We're going to be continued
kind of like a good advertisement for desal, right?
Yes,
which has not been used up till this point.
We are optimistic about the benefits. One of the things that we are starting to explore is, and it won't be cheap, but a potential project to move desalinated water up to Cater.
Okay.
Because that way we can blend it, and the entire community can take advantage of that blended water quality.
That was actually my next question on that meeting in October, because I know the desal just pushes up into, call it the lower half of Santa Barbara, and it can't get any higher than that. Will that October discussion also talk about the out years plans on how we would get desal up to Cater and then back down to the top half of the city?
We are exploring it, but the October discussion will be on potable reuse only. Mm-hmm.
So that would that be part of the prior study that's being done as part of capital improvements?
We are working to develop that information, in particular for a potential discussion this winter and spring if we choose to expand the desal plant.
Okay.
That's where this pipeline would be essential for our use.
And then last question on that photo, is there any conceivable way that barge has to be moved again to handle purchased water coming through the state water system?
I will be talking about that in the drought update.
The thing I want to know, it just goes further along, doesn't it? Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Dillon.
I don't want start a long discussion of water chemistry, but if we accept that the bromine's coming from saltwater invading the delta and being shipped down to us with the state water, and also that dibromodichloromethane is more toxic than trichloromethane, then in fact, by creating bromate with the ozonation, we are reducing the toxicity of the TTHMs, even though we have a total level and it doesn't distinguish between those speciations, and also, in fact, probably decreasing the overall TTHMs. So maybe we are getting some advantage out of creating this bromate with the ozonation.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you for the update. All right, we will move on to item 6D, Stage 3 Drought Update. Mr. Hagemark, you're up.
Mr. Chair, Joshua Hagmark, Water Resources Manager. I would say here for another drought update, but this is a little different focus this time. I will be talking about our supply strategies and going through our current situation, but we're also going to dive into what we need to tackle this next year. For us in the water world, October 1st is the beginning of the water year, and so we are ending the 5th year of this drought, and so starting October 1st, we will be in the 6th year. It will officially become the driest 5 years on record, smashing previous records by probably over 12 inches over that same time period, and that was our drought of record. I do have Renee Brook from our community development. She's our city planner. She's here today to talk about the development aspects of water conservation. So, thanks. There you go. So today we'll be going over the drought status, community conservation, current water supply strategy, lake and reservoir operations, drought response capital project highlights. And then we're going to dive into the two components of really water usage, which is the supply management and the demand management side of it. And then we're going to end with discussion and input. We hope to get some really meaningful information from the Water Commission that we can take to council next week. And it will be very helpful in guiding where we go next and what we bring back to you next for discussion. So, as been mentioned before, Santa Barbara County is literally the epicenter of the current drought. It basically radiates out from Santa Barbara County. I went ahead and looked at NOAA's current predictions for January through March, our normally wettest time, and they are calling for below average rainfall. Again, we take this with a grain of salt. Last year they were saying we were going to get above average rainfall, but certainly this is not an optimistic outlook given our current water supply situation. On the brighter side, we saw 42% conservation from our community in August, which is outstanding, particularly what we're going to be talking about today. And that brings our cumulative average to 36%. And what I hope to be talking about in the future, a 12-month running average. I think we're to the point now we need to be talking about our 12-month running average. We're going to be looking to move our 12-month running average from 35% to 40%. We believe that's going to be the target we need to achieve to ensure that we have adequate supplies going forward under the current water supply conditions. So we have added to our graphic here. We are, as of October 1st, we will be entering year 6 of this drought. And what we, in good practice, we've added year 8 to the list. So we're looking 2 years out. We've actually done very good with our water supply planning in the sense of water purchases. We do recognize a shortage out there 2 years out. But at this time, we have adequate supplies to meet demands overall. But what I'm going to get to is that we do have some conveyance constraints. And that's what I've highlighted in this graphic here, which shows our monthly usage. And there's a lot of information here showing the various supplies in every month. But what we're focused on right now is August, September, and October of 2017, this coming water year. We are recognizing what amounts to about a 300 acre-foot shortage, basically where we have adequate supplies, but we cannot get them all here. We cannot pull it out of the ground, and we can't convey it from other sources outside of the area to meet all of our peak demands. And so we are focused on trying to address that, and we believe we need to move forward. We can't just wait until next spring to do that. We need to start moving forward on this now. And here's kind of the driver behind that. This blue line represents the volume of water the city itself has in storage in Kachuma. And you will notice it's basically been on a decline, but it is plummeting. And we basically, come January, we anticipate having no water in storage, which is another first. And the challenge with that is currently the state water system is planned to go offline for about 2 to 3 weeks for maintenance in January. Ray Stokes, the general manager or director for CCWA, is pushing hard to get that suspended. They are going to try in November and do some of this work with the facilities in operation. And if they can get it done, then they can cancel that January shutdown. We're hopeful that they can do that, because if they can, then that will mean we can be able to pump water into the lake in January and keep some level of storage in Kachuma.
A couple questions on the water supply. I noticed we're assuming 30% state water allocation going forward. For a few years, we were assuming 0 state water allocation. How did we go from 0 back to 35?
Commissioner Burney, given that the reservoirs in Northern California all seem to be in really good shape at this point, we feel fairly confident that we will be getting some allocation, and so we made. I thought 0 was a little too conservative. I think we'll see some out of this. The initial 0 was because the state really got caught off guard with its storage of water in reservoirs, but I think they've gotten a better handle on it now, and so I think it's reasonable to expect some delivery.
Okay. And then my other question, over the last few years, you've done a fantastic job of essentially borrowing other people's capacity when it's available. Is that part of the plan? How likely do we think that's going to be to kind of take care of this shortfall that we're seeing, or have things changed?
Yeah, things have gotten considerably worse, and I'll talk about it some more later in my presentation, but we do not believe there will be excess capacity. Given the condition of the lake, both Carpinteria and Montecito are going to be utilizing their full capacity in the pipeline, and so we don't see an opportunity like we have seen in the past for that excess water delivery.
Is the shutdown on the state water project, is that CCWA, or is that further north?
It's the entire system. They just general maintenance that they do, but they normally do it in November. It's kind of a yearly thing that they do. They're going to try and do a lot of this maintenance while the system is up in November, and if they can't, there's a lot of pressure to take it down and do it. Obviously, we want the system to be reliable. That's a primary focus. We cannot have it going down in the summer. That would be catastrophic. But if they can complete the maintenance in November with it operating, that would be immensely helpful. That would allow us to deliver a couple hundred acre feet more to the lake in January. So Lake Kachuma sits at 14,468 acre feet, which is about 7.5% of capacity. The barge was located June 28th and 29th to its new location, just in time for the downstream release, which began on July 12th. We had been anticipating a release of about 8,000 acre feet over the 6 to 8 week period. The release actually ended up being just over, almost 12,000 acre feet, and wrapped up at the end on August 29th. The lake elevation we thought was going to drop by a little over 10 feet, dropped by about 16 feet. There was a lot of challenges with this situation, and probably read about it in the paper, but there was a clause in a 1973 state water rights order that gave the downstream users the ability to do a negative water release, something they had never done before, something we had never discussed before, and something they did not share with us that they were planning to do, nor did the Bureau. And so it wasn't until mid-August that we got a very cryptic email from the Bureau stating that it wasn't even very clear that the release was going to go on. We thought it was going to wrap up in mid-August. And we called an all-hands meeting. City attorney was on the phone. We listened to their description of this and they part of the order that they were planning to use. And obviously did our homework, and unfortunately it appeared to be legal what they were doing. Just I think when it comes down to the fact that the lack of communication, I mean, we've been meeting monthly with a lot of these folks. We share our information about what our needs are and demands are, so we don't have any surprises exactly like this. We can't afford it at this point, and so that was really probably the greatest failure of this. And we do have a meeting today, this afternoon, with the Bureau and the downstream users to discuss how and why this happened and how we might build relationships going forward after this, because this is a pretty significant breakdown in communication.
So where does that water come from?
That's a very good question. The Bureau, if you ask them, it comes from negative credits. And I said, well, what is a negative credit? It is the minimum pool. It's the minimum pool that the Bureau has stood by and said, no one will use the minimum pool. It is at the Bureau's discretion when this water gets used, and no one's going to use it. We even went on the record because the downstream users were afraid we were going to use it and stated the city has no intent of using the minimum pool, and made that very clear in writing, because there was a lot of public discussion that's why we were moving the bar, just so we could steal the minimum pool. When in reality that was their plan, and that was what was very unfortunate about the whole situation. I hope that answers your questions.
So you might get to this, but I mean, what is the implication then for us?
And I do have we will get that at that. So where does this leave the fish? We are at the point right now, and again, the Bureau is the lead on this, but they have installed 4 5,000-gallon tanks and are filling these by truck because we don't have the ability to pump water to the Hilton Creek. We were pushing very hard to get these fish relocated to a hatchery where we could ensure their safety. But NMFS refused to allow the fish to be moved. They wanted them to stay in the watershed. They wanted them specifically to stay in Hilton Creek. We had even come up with a temporary hatchery of sorts where they could stay in San Ynez. We had been working with ID1. They had located a property owner and a way to move these fish and safely store them in. So they kept getting San Ynez water because that's the imprinting that goes on. And unfortunately, this has been just, in my mind, a massive failure of organizations to come together. At times, I feel NMFS really wants this to fail so they can point to this as, see, you guys aren't doing a good job trying to manage the fish. But at this time, the few fish that do remain in Hilton Creek are being fed by trucks, basically. So this is how the county and Bureau have decided to portray what remains in the lake. There is carryover water, which the city owns a significant share of that. I think we're somewhere around 2,000 acre-feet of that amount. Then there is imported water. We are currently carrying about 600 acre-feet of that amount is the cities that we have imported and not used yet. Then there is this BNA A&A account, and I've talked about this before, and I don't want to get too lost in the definitions, but it's basically below Narrows and above Narrows. It's basically 2 accounts that the downstream users hold water in, and the reason, how do I want to do this, just to keep it simple, because they released water and it didn't make it to the below narrows account, this 1973 state order gave them the ability to release 2,000 acre feet in addition to that water. And so that's where they ended up with this larger release. And they show the lake here at 0, and then there's this negative part. Well, this negative part really came out of the minimum pool. And the minimum pool that was sacred to the Bureau at keeping it 12,000 acre feet is really now somewhere in the 7,000 acre foot range. And that's what is really just unfortunate to this whole discussion.
Is there a chance that when we get to that 12,000 threshold that they don't allow us to take any more water? Or do they understand that there's that gap between 12,000 and 7,000?
Well, that's the challenge. We have our accounts that we're planning on using, and that's what's difficult about this. Now, on a monthly basis from here on out, there will be about 200 to 300 acre feet of inflow into the reservoir that will start to go to filling this negative, which likely, if all things work out by next spring, hopefully the negative is gone. That's the best case scenario. But here's just a comparison. This is what we knew in June. I believe this was June 30th. We had carryover water at just over 6,000. We had a little bit of imported water stored in the lake. The downstream users had a total in storage of 7,800 acre feet. And so we were anticipating a release of somewhere around 8,000 because this account does continue to grow every month. And then we had the minimum pool. And then we ended up with this, which is a minimum pool with now 7,300 in it, this negative that they're carrying on the books. And then, of course, the imported and carryover water. Where does that put the lake? We, as you recall, at this spring, we entered in uncharted territory. The last significant drought of record in the 90s, we had the miracle month of March, where we received 23 inches of rain and got a little bump here of about 47,000 acre feet of runoff into the reservoir. We missed that. Didn't happen. And so we are now in very much uncharted territories. I think it was interesting to note that 23-inch rain event, which occurred basically in 1 month, only put 47,000 acre feet of water into the reservoir. That was pretty significant and startling. And so we don't anticipate that there is really a rainfall event this winter that will fill the lake. We are hoping for just something to at least improve the situation. So this was a picture I showed everyone in spring. It was there's our intake tower. There's where the barge was. There's where the current barge is. You can see how far offshore it is. And then the picture that Kathy showed you, there's the hole that we had dug out, dredged before we put the barge in. And it quickly is now completely dry. And our barge is sitting here and getting closer to shore. And just wanting to point out, here's where our state water comes in. The distance between the state water and the current barge is about 10,000 feet, which is the same distance currently from the barge to Tecolote Tunnel. So it'd be basically doubling the length of the pipe. We did meet yesterday with COMB and their consultant, and it looks like if we don't get adequate inflow, a pipeline extension from the dam to the barge would not be necessary until the spring of 2018. That was very helpful information to know. It was updated with all the latest information we have, assuming no more surprises, which means we do still have some time, I think, to hold off on design and planning for this pipeline extension. We believe we have until at least next spring to kick that discussion around. But as I think was brought up by Commissioner Jordan, the ability to store water in this lake to meet those peak demands is really important. And so how to preserve that when we do start to get down to that level is important. So, I apologize for the small font, but I just wanted to cover this quickly. The State Water Rights Order, this is something we have been waiting for pushing 15 years, I think, was finally issued. A draft was finally issued on September 9th, and we are working with CCRB and its member agencies of Montecito and Goleta. And the CCRB team of biologists and hydrologists to provide comments by the October 25th due date. This is going to be a push for us. Our main focus is to review the effects of the invasive species. That's ultimately the whole intent here was to restore steelhead habitat. We continue to be plagued by bass who thrive in warm water and are a natural predator of steelhead. And there are many other predators actually along the river that have made recovery of the steelhead difficult. But we will be commenting on that, and we are evaluating what the impacts are of the State Water Rights Order. It isn't what we had hoped for, but it also isn't exactly what other agencies were hoping for either. It was, we call it a hybrid. And so we do need to do some modeling to understand what the water supply impacts are from that. CCRB and the city are committed to protecting the primary supplies for communities throughout the region in coastal agriculture and important environmental priorities. We do look forward to commenting on the draft and keeping in mind we have to work with the State Water Resources Control Board, the Bureau. There will be Cal Trout, there will be NIMS. Everyone will be commenting on this document. And so there are downstream users will be commenting on it, and to remind everyone that our efforts to date we've been investing nearly $2 million a year in trying to restore steelhead habitat along the San Ynez River. It's significant investment. We have removed barriers along 14 miles of creeks and tributaries feeding the river, and we continue to try and remove barriers and increase passage. But it is definitely challenging, particularly in these dry climates. I'm guessing 100 years ago the steelhead would just hang out in the ocean and wait for the water to actually come back. But we have some fish hanging on that we're trying to maintain, the few that are here. And then, of course, monitoring and evaluating the steelhead health is a key component. Is there any questions about the State Water Rights Order? Okay. Gibraltar.
What's your process for the comments?
Putting our comments together is going to move fairly quickly. There is a potential that it could be a extension could be granted, but we aren't guaranteed. So we really are focused on the 25th, and our comments will be coming from CCRB.
That was my question.
And shared with council and commission.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So Gibraltar, as Kathy and just move to this really quick, we will be doing a release. I just want to make sure that the Water Commission knows about this because it will probably get out into the public as well. We will be doing a release. It is part of a release we have to do as part of a Jin Chow settlement, but it will also we're also just going to go ahead and let the remaining water in the lake go in the hopes. And this is what happened last year. We had a couple hundred acre feet in there. We got about 1,000 acre feet of inflow, but we still, when we bring it down, we just could not. We were not getting the numbers we needed for water quality to feel comfortable with the water quality, and so we stopped taking it. And so our hopes by cleaning out the reservoir at this point is that when we do get some inflow this winter, it will be water we can use. This water has just basically been in here distilling, evaporating, and concentrating itself, and leading to a very high TOC. And then, as Kathy had mentioned earlier, the Ray Fire and its diminishment of capacity in Gibraltar is a major concern that we're going to be looking at. And just one more thing we really didn't need to worry about. Drought Response Capital, I do going to report that all 8 of our wells are up and running. We continue to monitor for seawater intrusion, and we are going to be increasing the frequency of that monitoring. We have been working with USGS to get that going, and so far we've been fortunate, but I don't expect that luck to last long, and our supply planning takes that into consideration.
In cooperation with Council Member White, we reviewed the hydrogeology of the Foothill Basin, and it appears that there's about something like 100 or 150 feet of aquifer thickness below the deepest wells out there. The hydrogeologist Robert Marks felt that it would not be efficient to try and drill deeper into there, but if things continue to get worse, it might be something we'd want to revisit. And that aquifer or that basin has the advantage it's not connected to the ocean, so we don't have seawater intrusion. So that may come back to haunt us.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we've made some assumptions that we will be seeing. We consider this year peak water. We considered 2016 to be peak water year from our groundwater, and we do our planning for diminished capacity going forward. Desal, just really quick, running through, the structural foundations are complete. Major underground is complete. The treatment trains have been placed in, and we've just recently gotten power, and they are testing the equipment. The biggest threat right now remains the intake pipe. There are critical components we shared in a presentation with council. There are critical transition pieces where the power and communication lines that go out to the pumps in the ocean have the potential to delay this project. They're very custom pieces, and unfortunately, our predecessors, when they did this project, go as far as duct tape and baling wire, but they were throwing it together quickly. There was an emergency then, and they cut some corners that are now kind of biting us. And so we're trying to make it right and fix it, but it is throwing up one of the most significant challenges, and this is something our construction manager is watching closely. We do have approval to work in the ocean, though, and we do have divers out there on a regular basis now installing equipment. But we will keep the Water Commission up to date on changes to the schedule. But right now, the operational plan is January 25th of 2017 is when we plan to be in production. One of the biggest challenges, there's about 42 days that it takes to ripen these filters, growing bacteria on the filters so that you get adequate treatment. It's kind of an interesting process. And so basically 42 days before January 25th is when we hope to be bringing seawater on shore and running it through the filters. We are working to see if there's anything we can't do to expedite and shorten that period. And so that's what we're focused on as well.
When we met in July, the potential start date or the expected start date was October, November. Now we're at January. What happened?
Commissioner Burney, the big trip was these transition pieces. We initially pressure tested them, and far below their design pressure, they started to leak. And rather than go ahead and hope that they would hold, we moved forward with replacing them. It was also challenging because these communication and power lines that actually run through the feed line, they basically transition in and out. They just poured them in concrete as they go in and out, so it didn't allow us to pull them out, which is the plan, was to pull out the old wires and put in the new. And so that was the other part that kind of fed into this, why we need to do these transition pieces. And so unfortunately, they're very custom. And we're fortunate to have IDE and Kiewit in their global reach, but it's still been difficult to get those custom pieces made. We just had one arrive, and we have 4 to make.
And so as we, obviously, we want to ensure that this plant is viable long term. So what are we doing now that's different than what we did a few years, 20 years ago with the original plant, so that we can continue to use this desal plant going forward?
So yes, the transition pieces that we're planning to use will allow wires to be pulled in and out and upgraded, and not the just bury it in concrete method that was used before. So this takes us to our discussion today, and in particular about how do we get the community now to achieve a constant 40% conservation. And what we have before you is what we would kind of are proposing, which is moving to this 40% conservation. We are currently in year 5, and we'll wrap that up shortly and be into year 6. With 40% conservation, you'll notice that the additional need for new supplies kind of goes away in year 8. And it also addresses that peaking issue that I had mentioned earlier, because we're allowed to build up kind of additional supplies in Kachuma to help us meet those peak needs. We've been very successful this last year in acquiring imported water. In fact, we got our Dudley Ridge bank water back. We purchased 4,000 acre-feet, and our state water allocation this year was almost 2,000, giving us a total of 7,265 acre-feet of water. And as you may recall, we have the capacity to deliver 3,300 acre-feet a year. This year will be more than that because we were able to take advantage of excess capacity. I do not have that number today, but it'll probably be in the 4,000 acre-foot range. We don't anticipate that going forward, and so we are planning around a 3,300 acre-foot number. Certainly, we will take advantage of excess capacity if we get it. So, as I mentioned earlier, Kachuma carryover water and storage is anticipated to be exhausted by December of this year. Kachuma to play a key role in the storage and conveyance of our imported water. Conveyance of imported water through Kachuma is expected to require bypass piping by the spring of 2018. Groundwater peak production in 2016, and we are planning for a decline in production. We continue to watch seawater intrusion, and we have worked up a plan for what wells we will idle when we start to see those elevated numbers go up. Desal current production anticipated in late January. But as I'd mentioned, there are vulnerabilities to that construction that has us very concerned. And one of the reasons in our discussion today why we believe we need to be planning for a contingency. Our imported water delivery constraints, as we had mentioned, and the anticipated supply shortfall if we continue to stay with our 35% conservation. So this takes us to the demand management side of this, in particular the regulations that the city can implement to try and achieve additional conservation. So as I mentioned, we are currently, our cumulative average is at 36%. The state has kind of backed off because a good portion of the state is not experiencing drought conditions, so they're not requesting any additional regulations. But we are facing a worsening water supply situation. Things have not improved, and based on NOAA's forecasts, we don't see things improving, and so we believe we need to continue to be planning for the worst. City regulations, we are projected to have a 300 acre-foot shortfall in the summer of 2017. We also believe strongly that we need to reestablish a contingency supply, and we believe it needs to be a minimum of 500 acre-feet. We have in our supply planning always had some contingency planning. I'll just be honest with you, that contingency planning is gone. We just do not have it anymore. And we believe we need to rebuild it, and the way to rebuild it is through additional conservation. Our goal is to protect the community's investment in trees and shrubs, to minimize impacts to the economic activity in the community, and to generate 800 acre-feet of net savings. A general ban on irrigation of turf grass has been estimated to save between 500 and 1,200 acre-feet a year. We feel those numbers, it's very difficult to guess at this point because a lot of people have already let their lawns go. And it's difficult to know how many people will comply with this. It's not going to be something we can go into people's backyards and check. And so that's why you see the range. My gut tells me, based on what we've seen from this community, it will probably be closer to 1,000 is what we see, just based on the support from this community, the engagement, and the understanding of the concerns that we're facing. So I do believe the 500 is on the low end, but we wanted to give a range because there is some uncertainty to that. Now, elements of a proposed ban on irrigation of turf would include, we had residential exemptions when incidental to irrigation of the drip line of trees and shrubs. We're working through these issues now. Now, this is the kind of stuff we're going to look for feedback from the Water Commission at the end. We're working with parks right now on trying to come up with information that we can give out to the public. Our preference would be for people to use soaker hoses to water their trees, not sprinklers. We're really trying to get away from sprinklers. It's just a really inefficient way to apply water, in particular at this time. And then watering of certified water-wise grasses. We have been promoting and providing rebates on grasses that use about 30% of what normal turf grass uses, and we want to continue with that, which means we know who all those homeowners are, and so we would need to go through and certify their grasses. And give them, they'd get little placards that they'd have to put up and display, but at least we'd know who they were, because their grasses really need to be watered maybe once a month, if that, and that is something that we would be promoting in the community. Institutional exemptions, irrigation at publicly owned and operated parks and recreations and open spaces. We do believe it is still important. A lot of people live in dense housing, and so their only outdoor spaces are public parks and schools, and we do believe that that is still a good use of water at this time. And so continuing to exempt those. Again, a lot of our parks and schools are already irrigated with recycled water. There are just a handful, it's a minority actually, that still use potable water, and it's because they're just a long ways from the recycled water system.
Are there any golf courses being watered with potable water right now?
Not within the city. All city golf courses are supplied with recycled water. Like we had talked about earlier, La Cumbre Country Club is currently still watered with potable. They're very interested in getting access to our recycled water, and when it's available, we would love to make that available to them.
Sure. Are they getting potable water from La Cumbre Mutual?
Yes.
Okay.
And then areas, active recreation at schools, daycare facilities, and after-school programs. We just, again, this is we've talked about this before. These kind of facilities really, in the big picture, are not big water users. And I think there's a greater public good to allowing some of this to move forward. But again, we're looking for comments and feedback. Commercial exemptions, turf areas directly related to business activities, ceremonial event spaces. We are contemplating exempting those, again, focused really on just grass that no one uses, no one recreates on. That's the stuff that we really want to go after. If it does have a significant value, and we will have a process where we go through and they explain what they're doing, and we will be looking for how they are trying to, on that property, meet the 40% conservation as a whole, even if they need to water that turf. So this is kind of what we're laying out for turf grass. I want to kind of keep going, and then we can talk about all of this at the end. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Brooke to kind of walk you through what new development means to the community.
Thank you, Joshua, and thank you, commissioners. As Joshua mentioned, he covered potential savings for water use in existing development, and what I'll talk about is new development coming online in the city. And what we are seeing in terms of projects under construction at this point, some are a backlog of projects that were approved many years ago, and with the recovery of the economy are now being constructed. So they might have received their approvals quite some time ago. And because of that, it is of a strong interest in the community. We've had discussions with City Council 3 times and Planning Commission once over the last 2 years about the water demand added by new development. And as Joshua mentioned, during normal years, our water demand is about 14,600 acre-feet per year. During our current condition, our target is 9,500 acre-feet per year. When we've looked back over the last 10 years of new development, we found that new development only amounts to an average of 27 acre-feet per year. And part of that is because we're seeing in a built-out city, most of our lots are being redeveloped. So it's a net new water demand. There's existing development on the site that's demanding water, and then the new development is only, on average in a year, demanding another 27 acre-feet. When we look at the gross demand in the pipeline, those are projects that are pending approval or have received their land use entitlements, but not yet their building permit. All of those projects, which there's about 130 of them, total 179 acre-feet per year. And if we look at past trends, we see that typically only about half of those projects actually get constructed. For any number of reasons, they don't go forward. And we also see them constructed over a number of years. So while we talk about 179 acre-feet per year with pending and approved projects, it's important to understand that all of that demand for water won't come at once, and it may not come at all. But we will obviously continue to see new projects proposed where that number will fluctuate over the years. What this graph shows is our historical water demand for new development going back to 2006, and you see it varies from year to year. But our 10-year average, again, with that orange line, is about 27 acre-feet per year. And this just shows in a chart the 179 acre-feet per year that I mentioned that accounts for all pending and approved projects. And then when we've had these past discussions with City Council and the Planning Commission, they have on every occasion determined that the quantity of savings that could be found by restricting new development, restricting issuance of building permits, or placing some kind of a moratorium on development, they found that the savings is well short of our projected supply shortfall. And again, that is on average about 27 acre-feet per year, with the worst case scenario of what we're seeing in the pipeline right now of 179. Also, as Joshua mentioned, our shortfall in 2017, if we restricted development at this point, we wouldn't necessarily see that savings in time for next summer, because it does take time to go through the building permit phase and construction and actually begin to demand that water. It would likely have significant economic impacts on our construction industry and others who, may be living in these new projects. And it's important to note that any new construction would be subject to the same water use regulations as existing customers. So if it comes to turf or installation of landscaping, all of these new projects need to comply with not only our adopted standards for low water use landscape plans, but whatever types of water use restrictions are in place. I think it's...
So as far as schedule, we believe we need to be adopting restrictions on turfgrass watering as early as November of 2016. We believe we need to start now to maximize savings. Winter rainfall, we believe, will help to smooth this transition. Even if we get rainfall based on past years, it'd be enough to probably keep most people's lawns alive without watering, and really shouldn't be watering lawns in the winter here anyway. It achieves full implementation by start of 2017, and I think that's the most important. We just can't afford to trip and stumble, and so I think having the community ready, having our enforcement ready, and the ability as soon as the 2017 irrigation season starts, we are ready to start recognizing significant savings is an important part of that. Puts the city in the best possible position for potential year 6 of the drought. And, if we do get, considerable rainfall, easily any Tuesday could be adjusted and restored fairly easily. We could put that back or remove that restriction. And so that's primarily why we feel like we need to move forward on this quickly. Budget, expect added revenue losses with the new regulations. We've very preliminary numbers believe that moving from a 35 to a 40% conservation will be about a $3.2 million loss for a full fiscal year. Since this is halfway through, it'd be about a $1.6 million loss. So our options are additional use of reserves. As you know, we're planning to use about $7 million from reserves this year already. So that's obviously one aspect to consider, but do we just go ahead and absorb those costs this year, and then, or do we consider a drought impact fee? This fee is to basically offset the revenue loss that we just talked about. It'd be a fixed amount over all units of water sold, and it's very similar to what surrounding agencies have implemented. So we'll be exploring this, and we'd welcome any feedback when we get done on that. Enforcement, I want to make sure everyone's aware of this, and for those like Mr. Keller who were around, Commissioner Keller, who were around last time, the enforcement is a touchy subject, but we believe we do need to have enforcement for us to be successful at meeting our goals. This would include staff patrolling during key outdoor watering times. The violations process has already been defined in our municipal code. There basically are 4 offenses, starting with a warning. And again, these are in play right now for offenses of water wasting. And we have found nobody really moves beyond offense number 1. Most people are happy to be notified. Thank you for letting me know that that's on. We've had great feedback. Our staff take a very personal approach to it. And so we have never gone through a second offense. However, it needs to be known that this is a lot more drastic, and likely that we might see some of this. But this is how our fines work out. It's $250 fine in a 12-month period, followed by a third offense, which could include a flow restrictor, and a fourth offense, which could mean shutting the water off. Other water-saving measures that are out there is rationing, basically putting every customer on a budget. This is what the city of Santa Cruz implemented. It does take a significant amount of staff resources. We'd probably be bringing in consultants to support us to develop individual customer budgets. And then, of course, the time to manage that. There's typically a school that you can go through to get your first offense waived, but anticipate that going and establishing a rationing program will take us about 12 months to develop. We are open and listening to Water Commission and the public. What other water use restrictions do they believe we have not mentioned or should be considering? And we also wanted to note that we want to continue with rebates for turf grass removal. Some of this may be counterintuitive, but we believe it's part of the long-term plan. When people do tear out water wasting landscaping and put in drought-tolerant stuff, it does take water to get established. However, we believe it would get this community on the right path if people have an opportunity and a rebate to remove their grass, which they currently do have now, but wanting to continue to move forward with that, where they can take out their grass and put in native landscaping. It will probably continue to demand some water, but when this drought is over, as a community, we will be in a better position. And so we feel strongly about continuing to support the rebates for that as well. So that leads us to our Water Commission discussion and input, and I did get confirmation that we have the room until 10:30, so we can take some more time to continue to discuss this. But we are looking for input on turf grass watering restrictions, potential exemptions and enforcement concerns, development restrictions, drought impact fee, other water saving measures, rationing, water use restrictions, and rebates. I'd like to open it up to the Commission.
Who wants to start? Okay. Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know we're short on time, so generally everything that you've portrayed up there I'm generally in agreement with. A couple things I find, and then what I find missing there from my perspective, one is, again, back to a plan as part of this to recapture the maximum amount feasible of discharge water. So, that's still we're discharging water and still having to go out and buy replacement water for that water we're discharging. And so I know that's another conversation, but I still think that needs to be a big tool in the toolbox. One of the exemptions I didn't see on there was exempting right-of-way trees. You talk about parks, schools, other things like that, but I don't see anything specifically for street-side trees that would exempt me from running out there and doing what I do now in the middle of the night, putting a hose out to the trees on the parkway and making sure they keep getting water.
All trees, Commissioner Jordan, all trees and shrubs would be exempt from
All of
this.
them?
Yes.
Okay.
You could water those with
And then
drip.
you talk about continuing rebates possibly. I'd also like to see some more talk in there maybe with creeks about low-impact development opportunities in any capital projects, whether public capital or private capital projects, specifically for right-of-way or other ways to recapture water for new commercial development that would then feed your even lower need water for your landscaping. So even if you do go to a low water landscape, you still have a water need. Why are you using potable water? Why are you not recapturing water from going down the street or coming off your roof or wherever it may be? And what are we doing to encourage that other than putting out a design book somewhere and hoping people utilize that? But why aren't we requiring that and maybe also feeding it a little bit with a little bit of rebate? I see the tunnel's gone on grass for me. I think that the future is finding a way to grab every bit of water that comes down from whatever source it is, discharge, rain, wherever it is, and continue to utilize it. So, thank you.
All right, Ms. Birdie.
Thank you. In general, as Mr. Jordan said, in general agreement with everything that you have specifically around turfgrass restrictions. I think that's been a long time coming, and it's really time to implement that for our community. You got at this, but I really want to make sure that we're emphasizing this when we talk about exemptions. Just because somebody or a business or a public institute might be exempt from the turfgrass restrictions, they're not exempt from the 40% conservation. And I think that messaging to the public is going to be really important. Mm-hmm. That yes, we do think it's important for especially public places to have some recreation, but it doesn't mean that those people or those institutions are exempt from the conservation goal, just that specific restriction. I think that type of language would go far for people who have concerns around any type of turf. Likewise, the one thing I guess I'd disagree with would be rebates for turfgrass removal. If we're not allowing people to water turfgrass, we shouldn't then be paying them to remove it. I think we should continue to have rebates for native gardens and, as Commissioner Jordan mentioned, things like water recapture on site, those things that we're trying to emphasize. But I think it might be time to sunset that rebate for turfgrass removal itself.
Maybe I should clarify, it'd be a removal of the turf grass and replacement with a water garden or native landscaping. That'd be the intent.
Okay, so then maybe it's just, again, a language and messaging thing that we aren't paying people to take out their turf grass. We're helping them transition to more sustainable. Drought impact fees, I know, are unpopular, but I also realize, given the state of our or the lack of our reserves, it's probably time to look at that. And I'm not sure about moving into rationing just yet. I think I'd like to see what happens, since the community has been so responsive to our other requests for savings before we move into rationing. I'd like to give the community time to respond, since they've done such a fantastic job over the last 5 years of doing so. But in general, appreciate your work on this, both on the restrictions and on the development side.
Mr. Davis.
Mr. Chair, I agree, again, with comments made by both other commissioners. Generally support everything that you've laid out. I do, with Ms. Verney, support the drought impact fees. I just think that it's really time, and it also it's messaging. there's a big messaging issue that we have here. You get questions in the line. I get the questions. Well, when desal comes on, the restrictions are going to get lifted. There is a perception that, in fact, desal is going to solve the day rather than plug the gap. So we have a lot of messaging issue. And again, I'll just go to the big one, and that is people are going to be very upset that, in fact, they have to do further rationing. They can't water their lawns, and yet new development's coming up out of the ground. That is going to be a perception issue. I sit on the fence on the issue because, in fact, the community has responded so well, as commented on. And again, you have to basically go with the fact that they've been responsive to the emergency that we're in and give them the benefit of the doubt before we would take that step. I think that it's going to be a difficult messaging issue. The last slide talked about, we can adjust if, in fact, things get better. It looks as if we're now kind of planning on a year-by-year basis. We could make it through the next year. We can make it through the next year, all hoping that, in fact, the drought lifts. But, in fact, in terms of the planning issue, again, I get a little bit more concerned that we're at you say, no contingencies, there's no thresholds left, no margin left, that if, in fact, the drought intensifies, if, in fact, the conservation efforts don't reach the 40% averages, if, in fact, the state water issues don't basically supply 30%, we're on real thin margins for next year and the year after, and that red margin isn't 3 years out, it's 2 years out or whatever. So the issue on development, I think the jury is out relative to the average versus the bubble. I know that in the 90s, what happened at this point was a rush to the well, that people started to get worried that, in fact, they weren't going to be able to get in, and so you had a rush to the well, and that we may see more of that development than the average. So I guess I'm basically saying I will voice the concern, but I'm not ready to pull the plug on either development or rationing. But I got to tell you, I'm in that red line margin that basically it's very close for me.
I think with all these proposed possible measures, it's important to evaluate how much water can be saved by them and what the actual cost in terms of enforcement or administration might be, because all of them will clearly take more staff time which will drive up the cost. I don't understand exactly how a drought impact fee would be implemented, whether it be based on consumption of water, some sort of percentage of water use or something like that. But somehow we'll have to pay for increased enforcement and administration of these things, and that's going to drive water rates up, whether it's an impact fee or just incorporated in the normal rates, at the same time that the water production is going down. So we need to figure out how these things balance pretty well.
And I'll just say I concur with all the comments that the commissioners have made here. I did want to just pose the question. Mr. Jordan kind of touched on this a little bit previously, but about reusing water, on site or having some sort of like gray water system. Is there any chance we can kind of impose that on new development to kind of implement or install these types of systems? Yeah, incentivize. Or, and we kind of also talked about the turf removal. I'm sure there's a pot of money for that rebate program. Is there some way we can start to integrate maybe gray water systems into that? Maybe not necessarily adding money to the fund, but kind of allocating some funds for incentives on that end.
So our rebate program right now, which is up to $1,000 per residential, does include gray water systems, and we do have some very easy to implement gray water system guidelines to help expedite things, and certainly have been working on expedited permitting for the ones that are more complex internally. So it's there. We are encouraging them. We certainly rebate people doing water gardens to try and slow water down. For new developments, there are really strict guidelines on what they can and can't plant and how much grass, turf they're allowed to have. It's really small, and in this case, they just won't be allowed to put in turf if we're in a turf ban. So I think I would say we have some of the strictest in the state when it comes to landscaping design guidelines. And, we do have the carrot approach and we have the stick approach. So we're trying both, and I think we've been successful at changing behavior, and I think that speaks to why we've been able to go so long with actually very minor regulations to get the kind of conservation that we've gotten. And that's what's tough. We're just getting to the point where the community has done a lot. We should be very proud of the community. Should be very proud of what they've done so far with very minimal regulations. And it's unfortunate. I think the commission and I regret that we have to go this far, but things just unfortunately continue to get worse. And this is, when you have a drought of this historical significance, there really, unfortunately, isn't. There isn't anything else. We've tried to push going further, as long as we can, but at this point, we just can't. I think we can't wait any longer. We need to actually up the ante, and we feel to ensure that we get that 40% conservation that we need to implement this next step.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, I would just add, as Joshua mentioned, the gray water system, and I'll just touch on water reuse in the form of rain. Should we get it? We are our stormwater management program does encourage through those smaller development types BMPs such as rain barrels and disconnecting downspouts to flow onto landscapes. So I believe more people are getting educated through that as well. And we are looking at relaxing some of our zoning standards, to allow rain barrels and setbacks and trying to accommodate more of those solutions. But again, that does rely on rain in order for those to be effective.
Mr. Chair, so what happens if, in fact, it doesn't work? We don't get that level of conservation. The turf is on the low end rather than the high end of how much savings that we get. What's our step if, in fact, we're not seeing that type of conservation? Because if you just look at the chart, that's a large, if you will, it's a large number in terms of what we're anticipating. What happens if it doesn't, this time, we just can't make that step? What's our next action?
So our next action would be in spring, and we'll be evaluating, obviously, improvements. Hopefully, we'll be talking about improvements in our water supply situation, along with how well the community has started to adapt to the outdoor watering ban. But should we be falling short and things weren't as positive as we had hoped, we'll be talking about further restrictions on outdoor water use. Maybe shrubs are out, and we're just sitting here trying to save trees at this point. I think there is a desire by this community to save those long-term investments that we have made, and I think that will be the tough discussion that we'll have to have in the spring. But I'm confident. I'm really confident, based on this what I've seen from this community so far, that this turf watering ban will get us what we need to get us through the next. And then the other part is we'll be talking about desal expansion. At this time, I don't know how we would finance that. I am working on that. I'm working to find out if there's any federal grants, disaster grants, that could help us with that. But that is our other option that we will be discussing in the spring as well.
Mr. Chair, and desal expansion would include then carrying the water up into the conduit area.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you for the update. Better keep moving along here. We'll move on to, do you have a recommendation on that? Or do you need a recommendation too?
I think you gave me the input that I needed, and I will share that with Water Commission. And I encourage you all, if you'd like to come and speak, we will be.
Is this on Tuesday's council?
This is Tuesday's council.
Okay. Thank you.
I would love your support on that. That will be helpful.
Okay, move on to the Water Resources Manager Report number 7.
All right, I'm going to move quickly through this. I have a lot of issues I just wanted to go over with the commission. I have before you, you'll have your actual versus actual plan versus actual production numbers. If there's any questions at all, I'd be happy to answer those. Commissioner Jordan made a wonderful suggestion that this be posted on our website after the meeting. So we are scrambling to pull these numbers together up to the last minute, and so, but we can easily make this available, and we will be posting this on our website. So page 2, just notice where we are with our 12-month average. Again, approaching that historical low we were at in the 90s as far as usage. Per capita use remains consistent. We're seeing what we need to see from the community there. NOAA's prediction for the next, was it the month of October? Continues to be dismal. I'm going to skip to, we've seen a lot of these graphics. Sewer, SSO, sanitary sewer overflows. We are currently at 4. Our target this year, gosh, it's 8, I think. 8? Yes, and so we're at 4 right now. We did have an incident last week where a contractor was doing a sewer bypass, and the pipe leaked a couple gallons on the ground, all contained. We are talking with the state. We believe it's going to count as an SSO, which is very unfortunate. But we're still, optimistic we'll be able to finish this calendar year below our target. Staff has been working very hard, and we've been doing this for many years now, trying to reduce this target, and it is very challenging with an aging water system. And then you'll see our recycled water numbers. Doing a good job keeping the potable water out of it. And then we've had some movement on our Warren Act for the pass-through. The EA, final EA, is supposed to be out shortly. We've been waiting on comments from the Bureau, and we expect to see those shortly. I did want to talk about water sewer buy-in fees. I had hoped this summer that I would have those back to the commission and then to council for adoption, but unfortunately the workload has just been such that we have not had the time to put towards this. My new goal is to try and get this approved this winter. Also wanted to let the commission know that we are looking to refinance our 2004 sewer bond. We expect it'll save the city about $1 million over the 8 years if we can refinance right now. So staff is working with the finance department to do that. DSAL, contract negotiations. We have finally a funding agreement. This is the agreement to pay for negotiations. That got executed on September 14th. And I am working on scheduling a kickoff meeting with Montecito and our legal team for the end of the month. I'm hoping that'll hold. And then we're also working to put together with our Corollo engineers, working to put together a proposal to give to IDE, so they might put together a cost for expansion to meet Montecito's needs. I do want to let you guys know that the Water Commission Chair and Vice Chair will be meeting with Councilmember White and Helene Snyder next week to discuss the role of Water Commission and what is it that they want the Water Commission to really take up and focus on, given that we have so many issues that are going on right now. And so I'll leave that up to Mr. Kilborn and Mr. Davis to report out on our next meeting. CCWA celebrating its 25th anniversary. Like I'd mentioned, we're working with them on avoiding the January shutdown. And just giving a kind of a little brief on the CCRB, as I mentioned, working on the water rights orders. COMB, Kachuma Operation Management Board, there's been some recent shakeup this summer when San Ynez Water Conservation Improvement District Number 1, ID1, has backed out of COMB. A lot of those discussions have been happening in closed session, of which I am not involved in, but trying to unravel how the costs now work going forward. What it has done is removed the drama from COMB meetings. They've become rather boring and routine, which is good. but now trying to understand how we go about working together in the future. Their main objection for leaving was they did not feel the money being spent on fish restoration was appropriate. Monthly county member unit meetings. There is monthly meetings where we're sitting down, all of us on the South Coast here, and every other month we invite the San Ynez folks to join us, and we are collaborating and sharing information. We have Dale Francisco, the general manager for CCRB, attending those as well. Again, an opportunity for us all to share and be on the same page. And then I also want to let you know that we have are getting closer. Rain, water conditioning company in town. They are going to be building a facility at El Estero to discharge brine, and so that is moving forward. And then we have a meeting scheduled with the county's head office to talk about making sure that they implement our water use regulations in the county. It's kind of been a gray area when the city implements these things, how we enforce them in the county. They've been receptive to it, but one of the things that we'll be talking to them is the watering of the county courthouse and that lawn. Do they really need to water all of that lawn? It seems it's always a hot button for phone calls that we get, and so we don't have jurisdictions on county properties. The county bowl, the county courthouse, all that stuff is county property, and so we're hoping to get some clarification. Our initial feedback from them is, yes, we want to echo whatever the city is doing to help with the water supply planning. So that was optimistic, but I will follow up on that. And last but not least, we wanted to recognize an outstanding employee today. And will you please come up here? Chair Kilborn and I and the commission would like to recognize you for your many years of service. Come over here. Okay, dear Ann, it is a great pleasure that we recognize you for your many years of exemplary public service. In your 17 years with the city, you have provided unwavering support to all sections of public works, including streets, transportation, engineering, water, and wastewater. I kid you not, she's worked for every part of public works. She knows it all. She's great. Everyone knows her, knows how hard she works. Your reputation as being self-motivated, hardworking, detailed-oriented, and above all, passionate about providing excellent public service is a lasting legacy you will leave behind. Over the years, you have willingly served many roles and have taken on many duties. For the past 10 years, you have served as the Water Commission Secretary, ensuring the agendas were proofed, posted on time every month for the Commission and public. Your attention to detail on the meeting minutes have provided invaluable to summarizing the discussions. You took on this important duty as your own, and you approached it in the same way you approach all your work, with a high level of professionalism and care, always ensuring the work was complete to a high standard. Congratulations on your retirement. And that concludes my manager report, and we have some nice treats. Hopefully everyone will...
Joshua? Before you close, Charles Newman from Montecito Water District came this morning to introduce himself to the commission. I don't know if you want to take just a second, Charles, and come over to the mic and introduce yourself.
Yeah, come on up.
Want to stand between coffee and refreshments, and the celebration of your service. Just want to introduce myself. I'm Charles Newman from the Montecito Water District. Very pleased to hear what you're doing in the city and to tell you that I personally, and I think my colleagues on the board and our staff are really enjoying working with you and your staff. And I personally view water as a problem to be resolved on a broader than district basis. I think of it, frankly, like fire. If there's a fire in Santa Barbara, Montecito would be among the first responders, and I think we need to think and work toward water in the same way. So thank you. Nice to meet you all, and hope to talk to each of you individually, and congratulations.
All right, great, thanks. Okay, so next meeting, October 20th, 2016, 8 o'clock in the room here. Any other comments before we leave? All right. Meeting adjourned at 10:20ish.